So one thing that's puzzled me about the Sonic Generations plot in recent years is that despite that, supposedly Classic Sonic and Classic Tails are supposed to be younger versions of modern Sonic and modern Tails, but apparently modern Sonic and modern Tails don't seem to remember anything from when this happened before. And if they were and if Classic Tails and Classic Sonic are supposed to be younger versions of modern Tails and modern Sonic, then wouldn't modern Tails and modern Sonic remember these events happening in a very similar fashion and in a very similar way? Like, we do get certain instances of like modern Sonic remembering things.
Is it me, or is that place we were just in awfully familiar?
Not to me.
This place is giving me deja vu all over again.
But they're really talking about the stages themselves, not really the not really the events surrounding or why they're there. Like, and there's also the fact that Dr. Eggman doesn't see any flaws in his plan with the Time Eater, despite the fact that he supposedly has done this plan before. Like, even in the ending cutscene, he tells his past self that this will be, quote, his plan pretty soon.
Let me just say that this was a brilliant plan that you came up with. Don't get too self-righteous. It'll be your plan pretty soon.
And then Robotnik says under his breath and towards the audience that he'll dedicate the rest of his life to forgetting it.
I'm gonna dedicate the rest of my life to forgetting it. I heard that!
And despite the fact that that's most likely just a joke, if he really was serious about that, then why did modern Eggman do this plan all over again? Like, it wouldn't make sense. Like, he would have known this plan would have failed him before. So I don't understand why he would even go to the Time Eater at the end of Sonic Colors and just leave Orbot and Cubot just drifting off into space. Like that doesn't make any sense. Like, why would he try the same plan again despite knowing it failed him? But then again, like, the plots of Sonic Adventure 2 and Sonic 06 are pretty similar, with him trying to take control of an infinite god, of a god of infinite power, and it completely backfiring on him, of it turning on him and like destroying the world. So I guess in that instance, you can say that Eggman doesn't really learn from his mistakes that often. But even then, like, he met his past self, and so, like, that should have changed the timeline if you think about it, since his past self saw the disaster that was his Time Eater plan. So his past self should have taken that line seriously and actually forgotten the plot and actually forgotten the plan and not done it. And then there's also the fact that none of the past characters are really, like, outright stated to be past versions of themselves. Like, sure, we do get certain lines, like the infamous "Hey Sonic, your future's gonna be great" line at the end.
Hey Sonic! Enjoy your future! It's gonna be great!
But, like, that isn't... Like, if you think about it, that line could be interpreted in a multitude of ways. Like, it could be him talking to his past self, saying to have a great future. But then you realize... But then you could also be, like, since he's like a younger Sonic from like an alternate timeline, that his future could be great. Not specifically that modern Sonic's future would be great. And I know everybody likes to meme on that line by saying games like Sonic 06 and Sonic Boom. Like, that was a big meme back when this game came out and like a few years afterwards. But let me tell you this, Sonic 06 never happened in the main timeline. At least not in the same fashion as presented in the game. Now, Sonic Boom is a completely separate universe, so I don't understand why people even brought that game up when defending this, when like trashing on this line. Like, that doesn't even make any sense. All of this is to say that brings me to Forces and that infamous Ret-Con of Tails saying that Sonic is from another, that classic Sonic is from another dimension.
Wait, what? Oh, you're that Sonic from another dimension, aren't you?
Which a lot of people like to trash on that line too, saying it's a pointless Ret-Con. But in my opinion, it's the only way for Sonic Generations' plot to make sense. With considering everything I've just said, like how modern Tails and modern Sonic don't seem to remember the events and Generations happening, despite the fact that, again, classic Sonic and classic Tails are supposedly younger versions of them. So in that case, they should have learned from their mistakes and not repeat this same incident over again. Same with Robotnik. Like, if Dr. Eggman supposedly did this plan before, then why did he do it in the exact same fashion that caused him to get stuck in the white space again? Like, that just doesn't make sense. Unless you consider the idea that the, quote, past versions of all these characters are actually just from a separate dimension. Which would make sense why they would make similar mistakes as to their modern counterparts. As to why, and it also explains why their modern counterparts don't remember these events happening in this exact same fashion. Or the fact that they don't question it. And sure, and everyone's probably gonna point to that line where Tails and classic Tails say that they're traveling through time and space.
Doubles of us? Places and enemies from our past? We're traveling through time and space!
And I tell you to remember that the key phrase is time and space, not just time. And space can include other dimensions. And so maybe everyone in this situation is just thinking that they're past versions of themselves, considering that they look almost identical to them when they were younger, and the fact that the Time Eater also brought stages and locations from their past. And that would also explain why stages and characters like Crisis City and Silver and Blaze are there. They could be from a different dimension, not just a different timeline. Or a different timeline and a different dimension. And not from specifically modern Sonic and modern Tails' timeline. They could just be from a different timeline in which the events of 06 happened the way we saw them in the game. So, yeah, that explains why Crisis City is there, too. So, putting two and two together, you could only just assume that these two versions of you are from the past. When in reality, they're just from another dimension in space. And considering the theory that Sonic Generations also caused an alternate timeline split with modern and classic Sonic, and the key word being alternate being different, so it's not the exact same timeline. So maybe Eggman, in this instance, really did take that line to heart, and actually didn't do this plan that his future version of himself did. And so that's what leads to, like, the, quote, like, classic timeline existing, meaning like stuff like Sonic Adventure doesn't happen, because I would assume that when they were working together, that the two Eggmen would have communicated to each other, that current Eggman would have talked to past Robotnik about all his future plans, and considering that all his plans have failed, that Robotnik would take that in consideration and just not do those plans, or do them in a different fashion. Which leads to what happens in the classic timeline, where instead of things like Sonic Adventure happening, he instead decides to not do that, and that's what gives us games like Sonic Mania and like Sonic Superstars. And considering that in Sonic Forces, the classic Sonic we see there is apparently the same classic Sonic we saw before, we just had to assume that the timeline was changed slightly, or at least influenced. And let's also remember that time doesn't flow like linearly in every timeline or dimension. So, like, for example, in modern Sonic's time could go faster, and in classic Sonic's time could go slower, which is why they haven't aged into their modern designs yet. Like, time moves slower, and the fact that things happen differently could basically create an entirely new timeline. At that point, like, the world could be so different that you can consider it its own dimension. So that would explain why Tails says that's the Sonic from another dimension, because it pretty much is a different dimension at that point. Like, the timeline is so different. There are only certain things that are similar. And this is all to say, this is the reason why the modern characters don't really remember the Generations plot happening before, and the reason why modern Sonic and Tails don't remember Sonic Mania happening in the current timeline, because it never happened in this timeline. It only happened in the classic Sonic timeline. And that's whenever these two timelines intersect, we create like different timelines, which is why we get like two different epilogues for Sonic Mania. One in Sonic Mania Adventures, where Sonic does go home back to Angel Island, the exact same pose he was in Sonic Forces, but then in Sonic Mania Encore mode, he instead goes back. The Phantom Ruby just takes him straight back to Angel Island instead of taking him back to the Sonic Forces dimension or whatever. And so that's how we get two different timelines for Sonic Mania. One where I guess the Phantom Ruby took him straight back to Angel Island, and one that took him to modern Sonic's time. And so Mania Adventures happens right after Sonic Forces, and Sonic Mania Encore just happens right after the main story of Sonic Mania. And see, all of this makes sense if you just think about it this way, and not think about it so linearly as like one timeline, because clearly, with the current way the Sonic timeline is set up, this can't happen. Alright. And that's why I made this video, just sort of my personal explanations of my personal headcanon of what the Sonic timeline, what happens in the Sonic timeline, because even though like Sega is trying to like fix it with things like Tails 2, but I still have my personal timeline, and I personally believe that Sonic Timeline could just be anything like the writers wanted to be at this point. So even though I did initially disagree with the notion that classic Sonic and Forces is from a different dimension and is not a younger modern Sonic, but if you think about Sonic Generations in any way I've thought about in this video, then you realize that Sonic Generations would make sense, like in the way it happened, because again, modern Tails, modern Eggman, and modern Sonic don't remember things happening this way, and therefore are treating them as if they happened for the first time. See, if you think about it that way, then Sonic Forces' explanation makes sense, even if it is a weird retcon. This would also explain why modern and classic Sonic look so, well, not radically different, but they look like, it explains why they have two different skin tones and eye colors. Because it just wouldn't make sense for Sonic to start out with light blue fur and black eyes and somehow get green eyes and darker fur as he grows up. Like, even as a cartoon character, that doesn't make too much sense to me. Like, how does your skin tone get darker as you grow up? And why would your eye colors change? I know I'm probably thinking way too hard about this as a cartoon hedgehog, but that's what I like to do. That's the whole point of this video. This is just me thinking way too hard about the time travel shenanigans that is in this series, and that's what I like to do here. So yeah, this is also serves as like the first part of me catching up with various Sonic opinions, since obviously this whole debacle is like 6 years old at this point. But obviously I didn't have a YouTube channel back then. I only got a YouTube channel back in 2020, and I only got my mic like a couple months ago. So yeah, I've got a lot of catching up to do if I want to voice my opinions, which I do, since like the Sonic fandom, like my personal opinions aren't really represented that much in the Sonic fandom, so I want to get them out. So this is gonna be like one of the first videos that does that. So yeah, that was this video, and yeah, I'll see you in the next discussion. See you later.